From Chicago, it's Startup Hype Man, the podcast. What's up, everyone? My name is Raj Nation, founder and chief pitch artist at Startup Hype Man, where we help startups not suck at how they pitch themselves. How? By making sure their audience sees them not as the best, but as the only. And this podcast is the only show where you will hear from leaders in the startup ecosystem sharing a piece of their heart, their mind, and their story on how they are charting their own path, growing their companies, and choosing not to play the game, but to change the game. Before we get going, hit the subscribe button on your podcast app so you never miss an episode. Also, head over to startuphypeman.com and subscribe to our Point of View letter, where we share original articles, insights, and resources, all to help you become the only of your industry. All right, get your popcorn ready and get hyped. It's showtime. Ladies and gentlemen, making his way to the microphone from Detroit, Michigan, he is a venture capitalist and an author. Please welcome Gabe Karp.
Thank you.
pretty flat response there.
It's hard to, I don't want to bust into a professional wrestling demeanor. But I did my stint with the WWE a few years back.
We'll get into that story in a few minutes here.
Right.
So, as I mentioned, he's Gabe Karp. He is an operating partner at Detroit Venture Partners. He's also a venture partner at Lightbank. I mean, these are two of the most active investment firms in the Midwest and arguably the entire country. And quick backstory, Gabe and I have known each other for several years now. We both used to work at the same company. He was the general counsel at a company called ePrize, and we'll talk a little bit about ePrize later on. But he's also recently authored a book called Don't Get Mad at Penguins, which is, you see that title and you can't help, but there it is, right? Don't get mad at penguins. You see that title, you can't help but be like, huh, what? And what the book is all about is being able to embrace conflict. And so what we're going to talk about today is embracing conflict at the company level, as the founder, at the CEO level, embracing conflict to grow and scale. Gabe, once again, welcome. Why is this on your mind and why is this important to you?
Thanks for having me. Ever since I began my career as a litigator, so I was in court all the time, dealing with a lot of conflict. And then I moved from that after about a decade of that, moved into the startup world, into business, and kind of realized that the conflicts I was seeing in lawsuits, it was the same stuff playing out, the same patterns over and over again in business and even in personal life. It's just anytime humans interact, those conflict patterns continually repeat. And I found that when I resisted that conflict, things generally went poorly. And when I embraced it, things went well. And looking backward, and I've validated this with every single person I've talked to, anytime I felt there was personal growth or professional growth or something really good happened in business, it was always 100% of the time happening in the midst of conflict and embracing the conflict in a healthy way. And that is what fueled the progress and the growth. And I just, once I kind of recognized that, it became my passion. So that's why I wrote the book. That's why I like talking about it. And I guess that's the shortest answer I can give to your question.
And I'm excited to dive a whole lot more into this. I've had a chance to read the book. It really is, there's a lot of good stuff in there, and it's helped me think about things differently. Before we get into all that, let's learn more about Gabe, the person, the man, the myth, the legend, if you will. Gabe, I'm curious. So growing up in the Detroit area, what do you feel like having an upbringing in that part of the country, in that part of the world? What perspective do you think that's given you on the nature of human relationships?
It's hard to know what my perspective would be if I grew up elsewhere, because I didn't. But oftentimes you hear people talk about the Midwest mentality, which is very different from the coasts. In my experience and dealing with people who are born and bred on the coast, there is a difference, not better or worse, just different. And I guess, growing up in Detroit, it was a tough city in a tough Metro Detroit area to grow up in, especially the time I did, because it wasn't economic living. Certainly not in the way, there's been a big comeback recently, but there's just a toughness and grittiness to people in Detroit that I've experienced that's unlike elsewhere. Not to say other people aren't tough, but there's just the grittiness seems unique in Detroit, but also at the same time, there's a sense of community. So tough, gritty, we'll fight through anything, but at the same time, a strong sense of community to lift up those around you and help out. And those things they seem to contrast, but that's just how it is. It works. It's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, it's funny. I had hosted an event yesterday and was having a similar conversation about this idea of like the Midwest versus the coastal mentality. And I feel like Midwest, which is funny that like Detroit and Michigan are considered part of the Midwest because it's like up and it's not technically West. it's like North Central actually. But what we were talking about was this idea in the Midwest that seems to really come through is like a very much a collaborative mindset in a lot of different ways. Like you could overhear someone talking about like a startup at Starbucks, for example, and want to be like genuinely curious about it. And maybe like, hey, like I could help you with that thing, or you should meet so-and-so. Whereas I know in other parts, it's kind of like you could overhear someone and then you're listening for like devious or like insidious purposes. So you can text someone else, be like, oh, guess who I saw here? And they're talking about this thing. Right. So I think I share in that idea of like the collaborative and community type of mindset. Now, if we're going to take a huge fast forward here and talk about your career itself, right? Like you spent time as a litigator. We spent time as coworkers. So just to recap that story for everyone listening, my first job out of college was at a software startup called ePrize. I think when I joined, it was like past technical startup mode, but there was like 70 employees, but we grew to like 200, I think, during my time. Gabe was part of the management team that helped enable the ultimate acquisition by a private equity company. Gabe was one of my favorite people to work with at the company. So he was the general counsel. And there were times where, there was like contract stuff that would come up with a client that you'd be involved in. So I always appreciated calls that did involve you because I knew. By the way,
it's rare that the legal guy is the fun guy to work with.
That's what I always said about working there. It was like you and Ira, and I was like, I actually like when our lawyers get on the phone and get involved in these conversations because they're always valuable and helpful and fun. And yes, it is rare to say that, but one of the projects you got a chance to work on that we kind of alluded to at the beginning before my time at the company, but to be honest, this was actually one of the things when I was interviewing that I saw ePrize did this, and I was like, oh, I want to work at that company. ePrize did a promotional collaboration with the WWE, which everyone listening probably knows I have a lot of love and affinity for. You got a chance to essentially like manage and help run the process, I think backstage, right, for this giveaway of Mr. McMahon's $1 million giveaway. Now, there's a whole lot that we can talk about within that story. What I'm specifically curious about is what was it like working literally side by side with Vince McMahon and pro wrestlers?
It was amazing. It was very eye-opening. I not only was backstage, I was on stage during Monday Night Raw for 3 weeks in a row. But that process began. It's such a big story. There's so many facets of the story, so I'll try to pick some parts. There was a press conference that they originally, WWE said, hey, we want, some executive in a suit from your company to come to this press conference to play that role in the press conference. Yep. And that was crazy. And it'll take too long to get into what ultimately happened at that press conference. But because of the way that I handled it, Vince McMahon, watching on a monitor backstage, said, all right, I want him at every show.
And that's his voice too, which is so funny.
Yeah. Which, by the way, his on-screen persona and off-screen, no difference. A lot of times you think that, no difference. And I guess I got to be careful because I don't want to talk out of school too much. But when you watch these wrestling shows, and when I was younger, there was just a ring in the center the arena. Now there's a stage that the wrestlers come out on the stage, they do some stuff there, and then they make their way through the crowd into the ring for the actual match. Behind that stage is a control room.
Yep. It's
basically the production room for the entire show. And because of our role, we needed to, I and two other people from ePrize needed to be in this room. And the only place for me to sit was right next to Vince McMahon. He sits at a table and he's got like 6 monitors in front of him and he wears a headset. And, literally like the side of my leg had to touch the side of his leg because it's so cramped. I got to watch him produce this show and I had no idea how involved he is with every nuance that happened. Like that entire organization just comes out of his brain.
It's a live scripted television show. And they're having to like feed lines or make sure people are staying on script, all those things.
Yes. And he's able to deviate from the script when, in a very seamless way. I was like super impressed with that whole operation as a result of that experience. And it was funny because I was on 3 nights in Monday Night Raw in 3 different cities. And it was so exciting to me to be there. But I remember at one point, my mom was watching the show because her son's going to be on TV. She wants to watch. She's probably all excited. And at some point, she sends me a text and says, "How much longer do I have to watch this?" Because I hadn't come out yet. And look, she's not the target demo. Yeah, she's not 83-year-old, woman, not necessarily target demo. But yeah, it was fun.
That's great. And it's funny because I always think about like the Vince McMahon impression in this scenario. He's like, that Gabe Karp, he's such good shit. We got to put him on TV. And they love having, it's funny because like you were an actual, attorney and general counsel who's appearing on screen. And so many times what they're using is like a prop person who they put in a suit, who's a random like stagehand to play the role of like lawyer in a scene. But because of the nature of this campaign, it required or it benefited from having an actual attorney on stage. And what's funny is like, for anyone listening, if you go to Gabe's LinkedIn profile, like the banner image at the top is Gabe at that press conference. With the WWE step and repeat banner behind him. But like if in the photo, John Cena is sitting at the table looking at Gabe at the podium speak. Most of us watch John Cena. John Cena is watching Gabe in this instance, which I think is just one of the coolest like stories and life experiences to have.
That was fun. I actually, at one point during that whole thing, someone actually asked me for an autograph.
And did you give it?
Yeah, I gave it. And as I'm walking toward him, I'm like, "Do you even know who I am?" And he says, "Yeah, you're Gabe." He said my name. It was crazy.
When you gave your autograph, was it your actual signature or did you do like a fake signature?
I was so flustered at the whole thing. I don't remember. I think I wrote some cheesy little, "Hey, stay cool." I don't even know what I wrote, but I said something and then signed my name. And I wish I could have given it at least a full second and a half of thought before doing it. But yeah. I was in shock. I was shocked that someone was asking me for an autograph.
Yeah. There's a lot going on in that moment. And then someone's like, "Famous guy, I want you to sign this for me." Yeah. So you've done a lot in your career. You have had a chance to do stuff like that at ePrize. Again, you helped essentially negotiate and broker the acquisition of ePrize by a private equity firm. You then got into venture capital. And through all of these different life experiences, what you've been able to navigate, in some cases it's been great. In other cases, you've had to deal with not so great people, is conflict in its different forms. So I think what's interesting is we hear the word conflict, right? And most of us think about how do we avoid conflict, right? How do we keep the peace? How do we make sure everyone's taken care of, et cetera? Why is it that, why do you think people do have that default mindset of like avoid conflict? It's a bad word.
Yeah. I think there are 2 big reasons, nature and nurture. For one, we're socialized from a very young age to shy away from conflict, to avoid it. We soften bad news. We sugarcoat feedback. Our parents taught us, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And that creates this mentality that, okay, well, if I have a contrary opinion, I should keep it to myself because I don't want to be rude. I don't want to be impolite. And by the way, that's not a bad lesson. It's a good thing to tell your kid, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. But I think that's misinterpreted, and it's sort of ingrained into how we view the world in a way that causes us to avoid it. And on top of that, there's the nature piece. So we have 1 billion years of evolution hard-coded into our DNA, and we have something called an amygdala, small gland. We actually have 2 of them behind the brain, behind the optic nerve on the other side of the brain. And that's responsible for detecting threats and preparing the body for an emergency response. That's our fight or flight reflex. And when you are in the jungle or walking out of a cave and you see a saber-toothed tiger, that response will save your life. But when you are in a business interaction or in a meeting with someone, that's going to drive a really poor use of conflict. And there's lots of physiology in it. I go into more detail in the book, but when the amygdala perceives a threat and kind of sounds the alarm, lots of things happen physiologically. We've got stress hormones flood into our body. We notice immediate changes, like our breathing gets rapid and shallow. We get sweaty palms. Our heart starts pumping, and we lose access to the part of our brain that thinks and reasons and is able to balance things. So we kind of get in this frozen, like just instinct. And it makes us do things that we later think, God, why did I do that? Or I think the most resonating example is, you ever been in an argument with someone and you think of the perfect thing to say, but only an hour and a half after it ended?
Oh, all the time.
All the time. And the reason is that the neural pathways to your brain to access that perfect thing to say were shut down. You literally could not think of the thing because access to it was blocked. So you layer that on top of all this socialization. Yeah, it's no wonder people like want to avoid conflict and not deal with it and push it away. It feels safer.
So on that note, one of the topics you present in the book is different types or categories of conflict. And as you define it, there's healthy conflict, but there's also toxic conflict. So toxic conflict sounds a lot like what you were just getting at there, which is, and that's where people rush towards avoidance. But what is healthy conflict conversely? And how do we start to learn to move in that direction?
Sure. Healthy conflict kind of harkens back to what I was saying before, that any time, people look back and see a period where they grew or they did something successful, it was because of how they managed conflict. That's healthy conflict. I think healthy conflict in organizations propels the company forward. It fuels growth. It fuels innovation. When people have different opinions, and those opinions come in conflict with each other, and there's a discussion about them, both sides learn more about the weaknesses of the and the strengths of the other person's opinion. That just puts everyone in a better position to make better informed decisions. And that's where growth comes. It allows, this person, because of this conflict, has exposed real flaws in how I'm thinking about this. So my thinking has evolved as a result of this conflict in ways it couldn't have evolved without it. That's healthy conflict. Toxic conflict is bad. It slows us down. It causes pain. It consumes an organization's energy, taxing its ability to grow, compete, and prosper. In organizations with toxic conflict, team engagements are painful. Client relationships are strained. Individual careers suffer. And the good news is, in the same way that we go on a diet cleanse to rid the toxins from our body, the same with the toxins in our organizations and our minds. We can detox conflict. That was actually the original topic, was either going to be the conflict cleanse or the conflict detox. But don't get mad at penguins, is so much better.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You get a cute penguin on the cover, right? Detox conflict would have been like a cover with like a protein shake on it,
yeah.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned that, right? Because for me, I think back to years ago when I was at ePrize, like there was a client in particular that my team was working with who I feel like it was always toxic conflict because we had put ourselves in position to kind of just be like subservient to whatever they were saying. And what we didn't realize really they just had a certain style of communication. Right. And it wasn't necessarily they were like demanding it or things or anything like that, but it was the way they talked made it feel like these were demands that must happen and unreasonable expectations and things like that. And we felt too scared to actually like speak up and have a say of our own. And I think that's where it could actually be neutral, but we almost like make it toxic ourselves. Not even necessarily the other person made it toxic. It's that our perception of the situation and our inability to address it and just kind of hope, it'll go away if we don't say anything, makes it a worse relationship.
I mean, maybe another way to characterize that is you felt bullied, even though the other side probably was not intending to bully you. That was not their goal. And by the way, that is a very common pattern that plays out over and over again. There's a chapter on it in the book called The Bully Trap. And that's a source of a lot of conflict in business, particularly when there are agencies and clients in that relationship. That's very fertile ground for a bully trap.
Well, and on that note, let's take a hypothetical scenario here. Let's say I'm the CEO of a company. I mean, I am, but let's not say in this scenario, I'm the CEO of a company and we've got a customer who's, they've been with us for like 3-4 years and they're responsible for like $2 million of revenue every year. Right? They're a major customer on our roster. But now they imply that they want to cancel, when the contract renews. Given like what you know about how the amygdala responds and all this stuff, what's like my likely gut reaction going to be if I'm not, conflict prepared? And as a result of that reaction, that gut reaction, what's my likely course of action that I'll end up acting on?
Right. So when you're faced with the prospect of losing a $2 million account, fear is gonna probably be the first reaction. It's like, well, that's $2 million. And then it's very easy to spiral in. How are we going to make that up? I got to now think of all the bad things I have to do in order to deal with losing a $2 million account. And a lot of times panic sets in. People just get into defensive mode. Other times that fear can turn to anger. Well, screw them if they're going to get rid of us. And then that anger can drive lots of behavior that's unproductive. In fact, destructive. When you as a CEO feel the stress of, wow, I just took a $2 million hit to my budget for the year. You're going to maybe take that out on your team. Maybe you're going to be angry with people on your team for putting you in that situation in the first place. And then that causes you through your concern for how you're going to run the company, for your anger, for being put in that situation, for the frustration of not being able to do anything about it. You're just going to take it out on the team and you'll start bullying them. And lots of toxic behavior flow from those toxins in that conflict.
I want to take a step back for a moment. What we're talking about today is embracing conflict for growth and scale. A separate area where growth and scale really matters is your product strategy as a company, especially if you're trying to build an app or another type of software product. Perhaps you've already created it and it's launched. Awesome. Maybe what you're not looking at is that's just the beginning and there's a lot more ahead of you. In fact, if you weren't aware, about 4 in 5 apps get abandoned after a single use. Because why? They don't deliver what the users really want. So how do you improve your app to avoid that download and delete, or use it once and then it goes back into the iCloud and never to be used again? Well, fear not. What's going to help you a ton is having an experienced partner that can help you out with this quest. And that experienced partner is a company by the name of Mikito. They are a team of design, software development, and product strategy experts that have built over 150 successful products for startups and enterprises. So what that means is if you're a startup today, they've got experience working with people just like you, but because they also work with enterprise, they have the lessons for what works at scale, and they can bring those lessons to you at the startup level. And perhaps yours could be next in a long line of success. So if you're looking for ways to scale up your product, you need to join forces with Mikido, and you can learn more. Talk to them at mikido.com/hypeman. That's MIQUIDO.com/hypeman. Mikido.com/hypeman. Today on Startup Hype Man, the podcast, we're talking with Gabe Karp, investor and author of the book, Don't Get Mad at Penguins, which is, again, one of my favorite book titles, I think, ever. What we're talking about is embracing conflict to grow and scale. Before the break there, Gabe was kind of explaining like how you can deal with a customer wanting to cancel and become aware of your emotions and to detox the conflict that can come in that situation. Whether it's that situation specifically or another one, what's probably going to end up happening is a meeting is going to be had, right? Because you're probably going to want to talk to that customer. You're not just going to do it through email if you're smart. And so whether it's a customer wanting to cancel or even just like an internal meeting, I think one of the most common ways conflict surfaces or perhaps doesn't surface in a case where it should is in the meetings that we have, especially if they're virtual meetings. My calendar right now is packed with meetings. And I think at the same time, like most of us can attest that the majority of the meetings we attend are actually unnecessary. So I'm curious to get A, your opinion on just like meetings in general, but B, how does the presence or lack of presence of conflict in a meeting impact overall productivity?
Sure. Well, number one, it sounds like meetings on your calendar, and you may want to.
I'm working on it.
No, get rid of that. So let's go back into the scenario you said. You've got a client who's going to cancel a $2 million account. And the likelihood is they're doing that because your company has made mistakes, or maybe you're continuing to make ongoing mistakes. And mistakes are inevitable. We're human beings. We're the ones doing the work. Mistakes are inevitable. If you have a culture that is designed around flawless execution, that culture is inherently flawed because there will be mistakes. One true test of character is how we react once we recognize that we've made a mistake. And if you have a culture of candor and accountability, then you'll embrace it. So let's jump into a meeting. And this is internal meetings, any other meetings, but let's use your client meeting as an example. If you go into that meeting and you tell the client, you're upset, you're thinking about terminating your agreement, we've looked into this and we realize we have made these mistakes. Ideally, you'll have identified the mistakes you made before the meeting. If you haven't, you need to draw those out of the client, which isn't as good as knowing beforehand, but it's certainly way better than not doing it at all. And when you have a culture of candor and accountability, you seek out the candor to understand what has happened, and the accountability piece kicks in. When you recognize you've made a mistake that has hurt the other client to the point where they want to cancel, the reaction is you step up. You do what's right to fix the situation. You seek out the conflict as an opportunity to demonstrate the character of your organization, the character of you as an individual. And that opportunity and seeing it as an opportunity is going to promote very healthy conflict. It's going to promote you drawing out from someone, I got to believe I'm doing something wrong, or at a minimum, I got to believe there are things I could do that could be better for you. Please tell me what those are. People feel uncomfortable telling you about calling out your mistakes, so they're not going to want to do it. So you got to draw that conflict out into the light of the day. And then once you do that and you embrace it and you hold yourself accountable and you make them feel good for bringing it up, they're encouraged to do it again. That really mitigates against this instinctive, evolutionary shying away from conflict, as well as the socialization we felt growing up. People feel encouraged to speak their minds.
The other side of accountability is avoidance, right? That's the other end of the spectrum. And that is one of the things you talk about in the book. Another trap we fall into is the avoidance trap. And a really good story that you share in the book that I think I emailed you yesterday being like, hey, I never actually heard it in like written out in like a first person experience story before. And it was, going back to those days at ePrize, it was before I had gotten there. And it was like the stuff of like legends, right? Like I had heard like, oh, the Pampers story from like 9 different people, but it was all like bits and pieces and like, tangential stuff that you're trying to capture. And what's interesting is it was legendary because of A, the mistake that happened, but then B, how it was actually handled and how, a couple of years later when I joined the company, Pampers was still a customer and one of the top customers at the company overall. So what I would love is if you can just share, even briefly, like what was the issue that had happened and how was your team able to manage and address the conflict appropriately using a specific methodology in order to achieve a better end result?
Sure. So Pampers Gifts to Grow was a loyalty program that we were running for Pampers at the time. Buy Pampers, get a code on the pack, take the code, deposit in your account, get points, spend points on stuff. A loyalty program. You get it.
Yeah.
So or your viewers get it. So the program required that a unique code be printed on every single package of Pampers. These were 15-character alphanumeric codes. It's good to have a visual aid, but just imagine 15 numbers and letters all strung together in a sequence, and that's the unique code. We wrote an algorithm that would randomly generate millions of these codes. And when if you think about it, there are only 26 letters in the alphabet and only 10 digits. So when you randomly generate millions of codes, you're going to randomly get some real words popping up in these codes. And sometimes they're nice words like love and cute, LOL. And sometimes they're not so nice words like hate and die or ISIS or KKK. So there's a best practice. You run codes through a profanity filter before you print them on, let's say, millions of product packages. And without getting into the reasons why, in this particular case, we didn't do that. And I'm sure your viewers can get a sense of where this story is going. So, imagine like a young mother who just bought diapers for her 6-week-old daughter. And if you've ever held like a 6-week-old child, it's one of the like purest, sweetest, most innocent things in the universe, just this bundle of love and joy and innocence. And the mother says, oh, it's a loyalty program. Look at this. It's a code. And she starts typing in her code like JL59Q. And then she comes across a 4-letter word that just like virtually jumps off the product packaging at her. And it wasn't one of the nice words. It was a bad one. In fact, this is arguably the worst 4-letter word in the English language.
I would agree. And if anyone's confused, it doesn't start with an F or an S, but it is a 4-letter bad word.
Yeah. It starts with a C. So we got a call from the client at Pampers who was very upset because they had gotten a call from this mother who was also very upset and basically telling them, your loyalty program forced me to type this disgusting word into my account. I couldn't just read it. I had to actually type it. That was bad. And they were very upset. But we had a culture of candor and accountability. That was a big thing that we lived and breathed. And this was the opportunity to see if we really wanted to live up to that ideal. Look, I'm a lawyer, right? So by training, when stuff like that happens, what a lot of lawyers do is they launch into defensive mode and they say, well, our contract doesn't say anything about running codes through a profanity filter. You mean you have a profanity filter at Pampers and you didn't run those codes with them before you printed them on your products and sent them out to your customers?
Yeah, shifting blame, right?
Yeah, sounds like you bear a great deal of responsibility here. But hey, we'll discuss a resolution. But that's not a good play. That's just you're already losing if you go there. Like I said before, when you are accountable, you step up and you say things like, "We are so sorry. We made this mistake. This is on us. This is our fault. And we're going to do whatever it takes to make it right." And we were lucky because most of the Pampers were still sitting on pallets in the warehouse waiting to be shipped out, but they'd already been packaged. But we paid to have all that packaging broken down. Everything was repackaged with codes printed on them that did go through a profanity filter. And At the end, the client was happy. And they said to us, they said, wow, you really screwed that up. But you know what? You stepped up. You protected our brand. And we know that if there's a mistake in the future, you've got our back. And we trust that you're going to. And if you think about it, our relationship was so much stronger for having made the mistake and fixed it than it ever could have been had we executed flawlessly in the first place.
Yeah. And that's what I think is interesting, right? Like the mistake strengthened the relationship. And what it seems like it took was a pretty good deal of like long-term thinking, right? Not being short-sighted about the situation, really thinking about what's at stake here. Like, is this a relationship we care to uphold and keep having for years beyond this instance? So can you kind of talk through?
Let's pause on that for a second, because this is where the rubber really meets the road. We did not know that we were going to save the relationship. Our mentality at the time was, we screwed up. We have to fix it. We're going to try like hell to save the relationship, but we realize we may pay to break down all that packaging and deal with all this stuff, and they're still going to leave us, because there were plenty of people, look, in that world, there are plenty of other competitors of ours just chomping at the bit, waiting to jump in, pounce at the moment they can. And we knew that was a risk. So our thinking wasn't really about how do we kind of manage this situation to make sure we have a better relationship with them and we save the client. It was much more about, we screwed up. We have to fix our mistake. We have to live that culture, because internally here, we got to make sure that when we make internal mistakes, that each individual will take accountability for them. We have to be able to call them out to one another, and we have to create an environment where that's accepted. So it was less about thinking long-term and more about, this is just who we are.
I'm glad you clarified that, because that actually changes my question, because what it sounds like is it's a matter of having the integrity to just know what is the right thing to do in this situation, regardless, like you're not doing it as a form of a future leverage. You're doing it because you realize, hey, this is the right thing to do to address this situation. Does that sound right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you feel like there are ways people can misuse this idea of like the embracing of conflict to use it as leverage, right? Like how do you address some of these situations without becoming like a snake in the process, right?
Right. I think the best, well, there are people who are snakes, period. And they're just going to put them in any situation. They're going to do whatever a snake does in that situation. And there are people who aren't snakes. That aside, there's a kind of a big area in between where people just aren't sure how to act. And I think the best filter to run it through is, what's my motivation here? Like, I now need to take action. What motivation is going to drive that action? Is it the motivation of fear? I don't want to lose this client. I'll do whatever I can to like save the client. Well, a lot of times that can drive good behavior, but that same motivation can also drive bad behavior. But if the motivation is, I believe that my company has to have a culture of candor and accountability, and there's no wiggle room in that. In all things, we must have candor and accountability. So at every moment, every opportunity, we have to live up to that ideal. If that's the motivation, that will also drive all the same behaviors that will drive fear of losing a client on the good side, and will avoid the things that maybe snakes can do. Here's a simple way to put it. If you're doing something to try to manipulate the situation to get some kind of benefit, then you're in dangerous territory. You're on thin ice. Like you might make it through in that one instance, but eventually that doesn't sustain.
Catches up to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny because I have a short list of people who I've encountered before who I'm like, I can see what you're trying to do here, and because I think for perceptive people, it's easy to see through that. And not only am I not inclined to help them in that moment, but I also am not inclined to like make the introduction to whomever later on if they're asking for it, or do the favor at some point later on if I feel like the motive is sour, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, there's in those moments, you're going to make mistakes. There's no question you're going to make mistakes. The question is, what do you do about it when you it. And people might remember that you've made a mistake. They might even remember the details about the mistakes you made, but they most certainly will never, ever forget it if you step up and hold yourself accountable for the mistake. That is the lasting impression. So let's say you are selfish and are superficial and you do want to try to manipulate, at least manipulate from that point, to try to show people that you are honorable and that if you screw something up, you're going to make up for it. That means a lot. It doesn't take money. It doesn't take an expensive education or raw talent. It simply takes integrity. And everyone has access to integrity.
On that point, one of the company core values that I developed earlier this year, as we've started to build out our team, is actually built around this idea of like ownership over the work, ownership over mistakes. And like one of the things I wrote in there as like a descriptor was like, mistakes are fine. Acknowledge that it happened and figure out like what you want to do about it. I'd rather that happened, you figured it out and tell me what you want to do about it, than a week later I find out by chance that this thing happened and was never brought up. And part of it too is just, I also don't want to encourage a culture of like fear where you don't think you're allowed to do, or everything has to be perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would say it happens in just about every company I've been involved in, but it certainly happened when we were at ePrize, where we made a mistake. We just realized we made a mistake. And we also realized the client doesn't even know about it yet. And the question always comes up, what do we do? So we could just ignore it and hopefully, resolve it, and it just goes away and they never know about it at all. But more often than not, I think what we did is we took the approach of, all right, let's understand this mistake. Let's take a moment let's not call the client up right away because they're going to ask us questions we're not going to have answers to. Let's immediately find out all the answers we can and the options available to us to how we're going to fix this. And then as soon as possible, call up the client. And the best case scenario is you call up the client and you say, we made a mistake. It's our fault. This is what we're going to do about it. And we want you to know. And that gives the client the opportunity to, and this is always possible, well, thank you for telling me, but your solution isn't good enough. I want you to do more. And you know what? That's the risk you run. And sometimes that can lead to a really meaningful discussion. If there's a good relationship there, you can debate with the client as to whether or not what they are asking for is too much. And if you've built a foundation of trust, you've created space to have that conversation.
Well, and I think what's important in that is more of that is centered on, ideally, more of that is centered on what's the best outcome, not who needs to be right here.
Yep. But there are clients that will take advantage. They're going to say, oh, you did make a mistake. I'm going to try to leverage this mistake to extract more value from you than is called for in this situation.
Mm-hmm. But if that were to happen, though, I feel like that's a product of how the relationship had been developed up to that point, most likely, right? Like if they felt like there were other instances leading up to that where maybe on the service side, like you're not living up to your promises, or you enable a relationship where they can do whatever they want, then I think the table is set for them to take advantage in a situation like that.
If they feel that they are owed, then that's the time they're gonna get paid.
I got one more question I want to ask before we get to our wrap up, and a quick question, quick response. One of the things you talk about in the book is like how to give feedback. And what's interesting is I've always thought about like the feedback sandwich as a good way to give feedback. For those who don't know, it's like feedback sandwich: good feedback, bad feedback, good feedback. So you sandwich the bad feedback in between two pieces of good, so they walk away not feeling like crap. Now, the term you use for it in the book is a shit sandwich. So talk to me about why that's actually not the best way to be giving feedback.
So I would say, by the way, for people who are really uncomfortable giving feedback and don't have experience doing it, the feedback sandwich is a good thing to fall back on for those people. It's better than nothing. It's better than not giving the feedback. But I think that when you adopt a different perspective on the conflict and the goal of the feedback, you evolve beyond the shit sandwich, the feedback sandwich. So here, let me just put some specifics to that. If someone's on my team and they are performing in a way, they're failing in some way, or there's an area I've identified where they could really improve. And I have harsh feedback to give them. Feedback they're not going to like hearing. Feedback that will sting. It will hurt them. They will emotionally be hurt when I give them the feedback. My natural defense mechanisms are going to try to get me to rationalize not giving them the feedback. I don't want to make them feel bad. I don't want to be impolite. I don't want to just have to deal with that discomfort of that conversation. But I adopt a very different approach because people think, well, I don't want to be mean, so I'm not going to give that feedback. Well, I believe if you have information that's going to really help somebody improve and grow in their career and you withhold that feedback, that is an extremely cruel thing to do to another human being. That is mean. Telling someone something that they don't want to hear, but that will help them is helping someone. That's a benefit. So when you adopt that mindset, that totally flips the script, and you don't need the good, bad, good. You don't need to rely on those things. You realize you're doing this person a favor. And there are a couple tools, easy to use one-liners that I think set the stage to make it a much easier conversation. Because a lot of times it's like, I don't know how to begin that conversation. Here are a couple ways to begin. You could say to somebody, hey, look, if I were in your position, I'd want someone to tell me this. So right then and there, was the person thinking, well, okay, well, I don't want to hear that. Well, of course you want to hear it. Or it's like if someone begins by saying, listen, I think you're being perceived in a way that you don't want to be perceived. And I want to give you visibility of that to you so you can correct it. Because other people might think, I don't know, you're a jerk or whatever it is. But I know you're not a jerk. I know that you're a great, amazing person. And I want you to be able to take advantage of this information so that everyone else can see all the benefits you're bringing to the table. Because right now they're not. And if you do this instead of that, or you don't do that instead of this, like those are things that will help you. Opening a conversation that way, get somebody of the mindset of, okay, I need to listen up here. And this is going to help me. Because again, like sometimes the growth hurts. You want to work out and have a beach body. You got to do some really painful workouts, but the result is you're going to look good if that's what you want, Right. And apply that to any situation.
Yeah. Let's begin our wrap up. First, Gabe, where can our listeners find you? Where can they learn more? Where can they get the book?
So the book, Don't Get Mad at Penguins, available everywhere books are sold. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. There's an audiobook narrated by me. Morgan Freeman was not available for that. GabeKarp.com, GabeKarp.com is my website. GabeKarp.com/book will give you everything, all the information you need on the book itself and links to all the different places you can buy it. And yeah, check me out on LinkedIn. You can find me there. But GabeKarp.com, that'll give you everything you need to know, and probably a lot more than you'd ever want to know.
Gabe, who is one person you want to give a shout out to today who's been helpful to you in your career?
I would say, I meant to give this more thought. My mom was one of the test readers for my book. And I really want to thank her because she helped really expand the audience of the book. I would write chapters and send them out to groups of people. And she gave me feedback in some cases, like what you're saying here, it sounds good. It sounds like it makes a lot of sense. I don't understand what you're saying. I don't understand what you're talking about. She said, I'm sure it makes sense like in business, but getting that kind of feedback from her and then going back to the text of the book and changing it to sort of normalize it out, make it just as applicable to business, but also to personal lives as well. I think it made the book a much more practical tool. And that would not have happened without my mom. So thanks, Mom.
Shout out to Mama Karp.
Yeah.
Let's now give our top 1 or 2 lessons or takeaways for the listeners based on the discussion today. I'll go first and I'll toss it to you. Topic today was embracing conflict to grow and scale. Amidst everything that we talked about, I think what I want to take away out of this conversation, especially what I want everyone else to take away, is as you can start to feel conflict bubbling up, really go through that, almost like mental exercise of mindfulness and awareness and like ask it's like have the emotion and then be able to ask yourself, like, what is this emotion I'm having and why am I feeling this way? And then try to make your next decision based off of the acknowledgement of that first. Gabe, top 1 or 2 lessons or takeaways for the listeners.
I would say in that moment to even put a finer point on it, when you feel the physiological effects of conflict, like the hair on the back of your neck stands up, your heart rate increases, or your breathing increases, just stop. Like take just one breath. And that's all you need to pull you out of an instinctive response and into intellectual awareness. And that gives you power and control. And you can use that to diffuse the conflict, to detox it, and then recognize, hey, this is a conflict. That's an opportunity for me to grow or make this relationship better or correct a mistake. And when you have that mentality, you'll seek it out and embrace it. But in that fight or flight moment, just take one breath. It's really all you need. It'll disrupt that instinctive response.
My final question, which is how we end every episode of this show. Fill in the blank, Gabe. Entrepreneurship is blank.
A way of life.
Why do you say that?
I work a lot with startup founders and CEOs. It's not a 9-to-5 job. It's a 24/7 job. And in my experience, people come up with ideas and they get funded on those ideas. And more often than not, they'll hit a brick wall running 100 miles an hour with that idea. And they're going to need to pivot and change. And it's a painful process. And you need the passion to carry you through all of those things. So when I say it's a way of life, being an entrepreneur isn't what you do, it's who you are. Because if it's not who you are, you're not going to be doing it for long.
Entrepreneurship is a way of life. I love it. He is Gabe Karp, investor, author. Go out and get his book. It's called Don't Get Mad at Penguins, wherever books are sold. It's a great read. And everything we talked about today is a further deep dive available in the book and so much more you can take away for growing and scaling your own company. Gabe, shout out to you. Thank you for coming on the show today on Startup Hype Man, the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
And for everyone listening, keep your eyes and ears open because coming soon is the Startup Hype Man mixtape, a hip hop album dedicated to the entrepreneur and the founder journey. It'll be available on Spotify, all the streaming platforms. Still working on it, but it is coming soon. So if you're not already, make sure you subscribe to our point of view letter at startuphypeman.com and you'll be the first to know. Take care, everybody. That's a wrap on this one. Shout out to our guest once again for sharing their story with us. If what you heard impacted you, do one of 3 things. 1, let our guests know. Reach out to them directly. They love hearing from you. 2, leave a rating and review on Apple. Or 3, simply hit the share button and share this episode with one friend who you think would benefit from hearing it. Catch our full episode archive at startuphypeman.com/podcast. And if you want to make your pitch not suck, reach out to us through the website. That's all for this week. We'll catch you next time. Raj Nation out. Believe the hype.